The Infinite Spark of Being is completely supported by listeners like you. No ads, no sponsors, just your support. If you want to help keep this going, there are 3 support tiers on Patreon for $10 a month, $15 a month, and $20 a month. No locked content, just a way to say I value this. You can also visit the website to check out books, merch, one-on-one sessions with me. Just click the About button, learn a little bit more about who I am and what I have to offer. And don't forget the YouTube page. That has the podcasts as well as binaural beats that help with meditation, rest, and sleep. So thank you for your support. Let's get started. Welcome to the Infinite Spark of Being podcast. My name is Keith Welsh, and today we're going to talk about something that might sound simple, so simple that you might underestimate how powerful it is. But we're going to talk about witnessing, observing, noticing. More specifically, the practice of observing your thoughts, but on an even deeper level, becoming the witness, right? Identifying as the witness and not identifying as the thoughts of the conscious mind, and more importantly, not identifying as the mind itself. Now, I know some of you hear that and you go, yeah, I know, mindfulness, meditation, watch your breath, whatever. But I want you to slow it down and really look at what's actually happening when you observe your thoughts. Because when you truly identify as the witness, you aren't just calming yourself down. You're shifting your entire perception of reality. And I mean that in a very real way, very grounded way. So we're going to look at it. The practice of witnessing how observing your thoughts shifts your reality. So let me start this with a personal story, because that's how this all starts, right? So years ago, I was in a very difficult place mentally, as I had been at various points in my life, but this time it was a bit different. It was more intense. There was more at stake, or at least that's what my mind was telling me. I mean, it's all a federal case if you ask the mind, right? So I was experiencing the kind of thoughts that you don't exactly invite into your conscious awareness, thoughts full of fear, resentment, and just a constant barrage of inner noise. We all know what that's like. I mean, look, these phases of inner difficulty happen more than just once in our lives. I mean, if they don't, like, are you even really living, right? But as I was saying, in this particular phase of my life, I was being beaten over the head with these future fears, things that could happen. They were very real possibilities, but they simply weren't happening at the time. So what I found was that if I was going to be present, right? If salvation and truth were going to be experienced in the present moment, then I was going to have to break time down into very narrow moments. Now, these scenarios that I was imagining, if they happened, would undoubtedly complicate my situation even more. I was legitimately scared. They were definite possibilities, but I was already doing the things that I needed to do to thwart those possibilities, right? I was already taking action. I couldn't do anything else, and that's probably the most frustrating part, right? You're doing all that can be done, but the mind is still beating you over the head with these fears, right? It was almost like I was doing my best, but someone was still barking in my ear, telling me to do better, and I just couldn't. I was in my 5th gear. I had already dug deep, right? And there are these times in our lives when taking things one day at a time isn't going to help. One breath at a time isn't going to help. Mantras weren't working for me. They weren't bringing me any peace. Affirmations weren't soothing my mind. Breathing wasn't even really helping. I was trying all the tricks that I prescribe people. What I found was that if truth was in the present moment, if truth was in the space, right, the space that I'm always talking about, then I had to be painfully truthful. What that looked like was me sitting at the bottom of each exhale, right? Sitting in that and saying, okay, in that breath, in that exhale, in that second, at the bottom of that exhale, I am fine. I had to go down into the sliver of a moment. Now I realize I'm being quite vague about what was happening, and I'm usually very open here, but that should tell you how serious my situation was to me and how I regard it now as still being very serious. It had everything. It had loss. It had anger. It had grief. It had financial issues. It had shame. It had embarrassment. If Ram Dass had been there, he would have looked at the whole thing and given me his classic yum, 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 right? He would have told me to eat it up. He would have told me that it was fuel for awakening, grist for the mill, and that's exactly what I did. I did everything I know to do. Thich Nhat Hanh, the old Zen teacher who's Vietnamese, he passed away fairly recently, but he would say to hold your anger like a crying baby. Well, I had anger, loss, grief, fear. I had a whole nursery of screaming babies, and I used it all. It all became the work. And again, it was a very serious thing. So the moment we're going to talk about today is that sliver of space between you and the thought. That's where the miracle happens. That's what being the witness, being the observer is. So let's break it down. Now, at its most basic level, witnessing is the act of watching the mind without judgment. It's stepping back and observing what's arising in your mind, not trying to fix it, not trying to argue with it, just noticing it. And I would argue that you're already doing it. It's a quick flash. It's that moment that the thought arises right before the conscious mind begins evaluating it. The opinions that you experience in the mind aren't you thinking about thoughts. It's the mind thinking about itself. You're just identifying with it. You're just identifying with it. You think it's you. And when you start to know, right, with a capital K, that you're not the thinking mind, then things begin to take on a different flavor. Now, I'd like to throw this disclaimer out there. Once you get this part down pat and you think it's all conquered and you start thinking, wow, I'm so unattached, God will bring you the next thing like he did for me in the previous story. Why? Is it torture? Is he trying to torture us? No. God brings it to us because that's what the soul is here to do. It's here to liberate itself, to see the truth of things. You're already lifting that weight with no problem, but you're here to get stronger. So here's more weight. This is the human birth. So in Sanskrit, the word for this observer is Sakshi Bhava, the witnessing state. This is central to a lot of yogic and Vedantic teachings. It refers to the awareness behind all experiences. It's not the thinker, it's the one who is aware of the thinker, of the thinking mind. It is the observer. And I think it's also important to note here, we've been over it a million times, but you are not the thoughts that you experience. You are the awareness of those thoughts. That's you, the observer of the thoughts. The mind thinks. You don't think because you're not the mind, right? If you were, you'd have more control over the thoughts that arise in your awareness. In fact, you'd probably have more control over the way in which you think about things, right? You'd probably love it if you thought about a few things differently, right? So we tend to get caught up in believing that if a thought appears in our mind, it must be meaningful. It must be true. But have you ever watched your mind just make up complete nonsense? It's like, it's something I point out when I'm teaching, right? That during meditation, you can literally see that you aren't doing the thinking, right? But the thoughts don't stop. They keep popping up and you aren't the one doing it. In fact, you're trying to be still and not do it. So you know it's not you, yet somehow we still try to take responsibility for it, right? We say things like, I just can't stop thinking. Well, you aren't the one doing it, so it's not your problem. Let it go. And yes, there are moments of pause when we get relief from the thoughts, but eventually they pick back up, and they pick back up on their own. Something happens and boom, there goes the mind again. And some thoughts are useful. Some are garbage. The practice is learning not to let your whole sense of self be hijacked by any of them. Now, let's get into a little neuroscience. Everyone's favorite way of justifying the practice of meditation. because simply practicing something, giving it an honest shot, experiencing a change in your life and continuing with that practice isn't enough, right? We have to have someone from the high church of academia approve it, right? Like Pope Sam Harris or Pope Neil deGrasse Tyson or the fucking Antichrist Richard Dawkins, right? We got to have them tell us, hey, it's okay. We need Good Morning America to let you know, hey, meditation's a thing. You should check it out. So when we observe our thoughts, we engage in what's called metacognition. It's thinking about thinking. And studies have shown our favorite thing, studies, right? Because again, we need studies. This kind of mental awareness, this metacognition, this act of simply noticing your thoughts can change the structure and functioning of your brain. This is, these dorks' favorite word. This is neuroplasticity in action. The more you observe, the more you rewire. So when you start to observe the mind rather than identifying with it, you weaken the emotional charge of those thoughts. A part of your brain called the amygdala, right? That's your fear learning center, fear memory data bank, gets less active. Meanwhile, your prefrontal cortex, the part that does the higher order of thinking, I'm sure Mr. Harris has mentioned this, becomes more engaged. You literally start to think more clearly. You see more options. You gain a sense of spaciousness, meaning you gain space between stimulus and response. You become less reactive. And this brings us a deeper spiritual truth, right? It brings us to the place of reaction is bondage. Awareness is freedom, right? Reaction becomes policy, right? Awareness is associated with wisdom, okay? And just to throw another jab out there, they didn't know any of this bullshit before. They just noticed it worked and did it. I want you to think about that. And some of you, this doesn't apply to, but some of you it does, that you're here because you saw a fucking TED Talk about the brain that mentioned meditation and that sent you down the path, and that's great. But let's just consider the fact that we needed these people to tell us that engaging with our true identity as the awareness, as the soul, as the space between thoughts, that we needed their permission to do that. That's kind of fucking weird. Just saying. Now, here's something that if you've ever had a one-on-one session with me, you've been beaten over the head with, and I believe it was said by Swami Vivekananda, the mind is a great servant, but it is a terrible master. It's like having to share an office with someone who never shuts up and is completely full of shit. If you've ever dated a completely insane person, if you believe every word they say, you're going to be on an emotional roller coaster for the entirety of your dating experience with this person. So you need to get out of that relationship, right? Well, living in the mind is kind of like that. But if you just watch the mind, right? If you witness it, right? If you witness it with a little bit of detachment, you start to see the patterns. Just like that crazy ex-girlfriend or boyfriend, you start to realize like, oh, this is that old story again, right? Or that person in the office that tells you the same story over and over again. I've been across cubicles from these people, right? You're like, oh, Jesus, here we go again. Oh, there's that old insecurity from when I was 8 years old trying to run the show again. And you create just enough distance to choose, right? You get to decide whether or not to engage with this story, right? When Mike wants to tell you the story again about the time he spent the entire day in a tree stand hunting a deer, and then finally he saw the biggest buck he's ever seen in the world, and he's up in this tree stand, it's freezing cold, and then the story ends with he didn't even shoot at it. You cannot engage with that story again because you've heard it 100 times. The mind's like, Mike, I'm referring to a literal person named Mike. He was amazing. He was a beautiful person. And I'm honestly just being such a shithead right now. But that's the power of witnessing. It gives you the power of choice. You don't have to engage in this fucking story again, right? There's a little thing I like to say. Imagine that you're in a boardroom. And there's a big, long table in the middle of the room. And around the table sits you from every pivotal age. 5, 8, 12, 16, 21. And then you, at your current age, are standing there trying to run things. But 12-year-old you keeps raising his hand, and then 8-year-old you keeps interrupting, and 16-year-old you won't sit down and stop harassing 5-year-old you. It's chaos. That's the mind. It's your job to get the meeting under control, hear what everyone has to say, and then make the decision that's right for the company. Because all of these versions of you, they're not going anywhere. They will always have a seat at the table. Now, let's talk about how this witnessing thing changes your experience of the world. Because here's the thing, like the saying goes, you don't see the world as it is, right? You see the world as you are. And as trite as that sounds, it's a mirror. Now, in my experience with human beings, I realize some of you immediately went to worst case scenario, right? What about Gaza? Is that how I am? No, that's not what I mean, stupid. That's not what I'm talking about. But that's a great example of how you probably take everything to the worst case scenario or the worst extreme. There's your mirror, right? How your mind relates to what I'm saying. How you do one thing is probably how you do a lot of things, right? So if your mind is filled with fear, you'll see threats everywhere. You'll act as if you treated everything like a threat or some affront to you, and it turned out that's how you experience the world. So if your mind is filled with lack, you'll feel like you're constantly chasing something. But if your mind becomes spacious, but if you as an awareness start to notice those patterns instead of getting pulled into them, you start to live in a different world. Same job, same partner, same bank account, but it feels different. It feels lighter, more open, less urgent. That's reality shifting. Not in some mystical woo-woo sense, but in a deeply practical, grounded, everyday kind of way. All right, so how do we actually practice this? Well, I'm going to walk you through a few methods that I've found really helpful. The first one is silent observation. Set a timer for 10 minutes, sit down, and just observe. You're not trying to clear your mind. You're just watching the mind do its thing, right? When a thought comes, label it, but label it thinking, because that's what it is. Then return to observing. And this isn't far off from meditation, but not exactly the same thing. However, a method I've used related to meditation when I've been in a very turbulent headspace is when I notice that I'm thinking and my body tightening up around the thought, I literally think the word thinking. And then I bring my attention from the thought and the word thinking to the sensation of air going in and out of my nose. Thinking and then breathe. This has worked very well for me in the past. I highly recommend it, right? So the thoughts come, you get wrapped around the axle, you notice it, label it, thinking, back to the breath. This alone can change your life. And don't forget, a dedicated meditation practice is extremely valuable in creating the kind of habit or ability in this to do this in the first place. On that note, every Sunday evening, I host a free meditation online. The link is on my site, theinfinitesparkofbeing.com, or in my link tree on Instagram or any of the social media. So join us. It's free, it's easy, and it'll help you get started, right? We usually talk about meditation for the first 10 or 15 minutes or so, and then we sit, and afterward, you can ask me anything you want. The meditation's only 15 minutes, so boom, there's your gateway. And the second one would be journaling as the witness. Write down your thoughts without editing them. Just dump them on the page and then go back and read them. But, like you're reading someone else's diary, you'll start to notice patterns. You'll start to notice false beliefs. This is witnessing in action. It's bringing it into the physical world, onto the physical plane. There is something so beneficial about seeing them on paper, not typed, but handwritten, right? I'm not sure what it is, but it's just different. I mean, when they're just thoughts, right? You can ignore them and they can kind of just slip under the radar. But the day you see the thought written in your own hand, it's oof, right? It just hits different, right? Give it a shot. It's like that little conflict resolution device that I use, right? When you said that, I heard this, right? And for me, when I'm at the point where I'm telling the other person what I heard, I usually hear it coming out of my mouth and realize how completely insane it sounds. So try that one. It tends to work for people. Just give it a shot. And the third method is naming the voice. This is a touchy one, and it could concern your therapist, but start to personify the voices in your head. One of our group members calls her conscious mind Carl. We were talking about Florence Scovel Shen And I kept saying carnal mind, and she thought I was saying Carl mind. And so we laughed, and her mind is called Carl. So there's Carl again, right? Or on a more serious note, right? There's little Keith, right? And this gets into inner child work a bit, seeing these old fears come up as an adult and then having some level of compassion for the younger version of yourself that went through that experience, that the experience that established that fear. This helps you see that you're not the wounded child anymore, right? Oh, there's little Keith again. There's whatever, teenage Sally, right? You're the one listening to that little boy or girl now, right? You're the adult. This plays off of the boardroom idea from earlier. Essentially, this is recognizing that this thought, this fear, this unskillful action is due to being a kid in situations that a kid shouldn't be in. It's very simple. And it's maybe none of it happened out of maliciousness and it was just whatever, but you're the adult now. Talk to the younger version of you and tell them it's going to be okay. Listen to them, hold space for that younger version. And number 4, anchor in the body. Sometimes it helps to stay anchored in the body while you observe the mind, right? And you do this by noticing your breath, your posture, your heartbeat. These sensations ground you in the present moment and give the mind less space to kind of drag you around by the nose. This is the same thing as bringing your attention to your breath during meditation. Remember, the mind is thinking of things that aren't happening in the present moment, right? Or thinking about the present moment in a way that might be pretty unskillful or not real, right? The mind is imagining. So we go to the body for what is happening right now, right? Breath is happening right now. The heart is beating right now. So as impermanent as the body is, it is still a great cognitive recentering device, something to help our attention stay with something more real rather than some crazy story that the mind kind of came up with. So the more you do this, the more you'll notice that things start to change, right? You'll interrupt ruminating thoughts before they spiral. You'll start to feel a gap between stimulus and response, right? Between what's happening and what you do about it. You'll become more compassionate towards others and more importantly, towards yourself, towards the younger version of you. You'll make better decisions because you're not acting from impulse. And maybe, most importantly, you'll start to feel free. Right? And I'm not talking about fireworks and enlightenment here. I'm talking about the kind of freedom where someone says something rude to you and you don't spend the next 4 hours reliving it in your head, right? Or the next time something in your life reminds you of a difficult time as a child, you don't spend the next hour stuck in the story loop and then physically feeling bad the rest of the day. That's spiritual freedom. That's emotional maturity. That's witnessing. Now, I want to pause here a bit and acknowledge something. This isn't always easy, right? But I've been alluding to it this whole time. But some thoughts carry trauma, meaning that they trigger the nervous system to fire in a way that it did when the event first took place. A term that I like to use, rather than trauma, since trauma is such a loaded word, is stuck data, right? Some patterns are deep, they are stuck. When we start to witness the mind and witness the body, meaning that we stand in the face of our material body's response to these stimuli, sometimes we see things we've been avoiding for a very long time, and that's okay. If it's overwhelming, stop, right? Take a breath, ground yourself. You're allowed to take breaks. You're allowed to get support. Witnessing isn't about forcing yourself to confront every demon in one sitting. It's about building the capacity to be with whatever arises over time with kindness towards yourself, compassion and kindness towards the mind, to the nervous system. This is the purpose of shamatha meditation, which means calm abiding, right? We're practicing the ability to calmly abide with the mind, with the nervous system as it is. We're holding space. And if you'd like more help with these past traumatic events, if you've tried EMDR and all of the methods regulated by your altruistic insurance company and done all the worksheets that your CBT therapist has prescribed, and you've talked about it ad infinitum with your rent-a-friend being paid for by your demonic insurance company, then again, reach out. I can move it. We can lift it and put it in a place in your mind where it no longer affects your nervous system. You don't have to live the way you've been living. just reach out to me. Go to my website, poke around on the about page, read about it, reach out, read some testimonials. They're on my Instagram, they're whatever. But if you want to know more, do that. Please reach out. I hate the idea of people living like this, and they just simply don't have to. It's just very frustrating. I think that our culture leads us to believe that there's no real help for things like PTSD or dealing with past traumatic events or stuck data, whatever we're calling it. Or at least the methods that they tell us about are kind of meant to keep us stuck in this cycle of suffering. I mean, really, it's a horrible business model if you begin healing people to the point that they no longer need your services, right? I mean, fuck, I know. Moving trauma in one session is a wretched business model. I tell you that right now. There's no money in healing. However, there is money in making people feel good for a moment that elicits a level of gratitude from the client. And then they slip back into their old pattern. They fondly recall how good they felt previously. And then they schedule another session, grasping and clinging, the source of suffering. That's what that creates. So when they say that, they're trying to heal, are they trying to heal you? Right? So when I say that they're keeping us in a cycle of suffering, I'm being quite serious. I guess the point I'm making is, in this fucking digression, is that you don't have to live like that, right? That's the third noble truth in Buddhism. You can wake up now, today, in this life. You don't have to wait for your great reward, right? This also goes back to my episode on decentralized spirituality. The power structure in this case being the insurance companies and those who bill the insurance companies tend to keep the healing centralized, right? And they do this by controlling the narrative about what's available. For instance, when it comes to something like EMDR for relief from PTSD, they sell it as an evidence-based practice. However, it isn't being done by the therapists in the same way that it was done in those acclaimed studies that bestowed the all-powerful title of evidence-based practice. In fact, the therapists that kneel at the altar of the insurance companies, the therapists that suckle at the money tit of the insurance companies, are not trained in the methods that were used to create the protocols that allowed them to gain the status of evidence-based. And while we're here, protocols don't work on living, breathing human beings. Why? Because we are complex and we are all different. So what works for you will not work for me, and vice versa. Healing must be fluid. It has to be loose. And more importantly, the mind of the therapist or whoever's facilitating it has to be loose. Often, I have to shift my plan when it comes to moving these traumas around in a person's mind. One size does not fit all, which you would have thought that we would have learned from our collective experience as a fucking species when it comes to things like prescribing medication for mental health issues. We don't all learn the same way, and we sure as shit don't all fucking heal the same way. But they are all too happy to give us some blanket response. And who cares if it doesn't work, right? They've got something else to give you. If this doesn't work, I got something else. If EMDR doesn't work, hell, maybe you just weren't ready. Bullshit. Everyone is ready. That's why they fucking called you, because they're ready. So anyway, so here's the good news. You don't have to create this awareness. You don't have to build this awareness. It's already there right now. It's always been here. That still quiet space within you, that's you. That's not something you earn. That's not something you achieve after 10 years of yoga and 3 trips to India. That's your birthright. You are the witness. As Pema Chodron would say, you are the sky. The rest is just the weather. So when your mind races, who is aware of the racing mind? You are. That thing that noticed that the mind was racing in the first place was you. It's just aware. That's you. That's awareness. And when you know that, not just intellectually, but viscerally, your whole life changes. So what does this mean to live your life as the witness? Well, it means you stop taking everything so personally. You start to see your triggers as invitations. You get curious instead of reactive. You learn to hold space for your own inner chaos, your own inner child, instead of trying to control it. And slowly but surely, your life becomes less about what's happening and more about how you relate to what's happening. That's liberation. Not because you're above it all, but because you're with it all consciously, and that changes everything. I love you. I love you. I love you. Once you reminded me, and now I'm reminding you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. If the infinite spark of being has brought you any value, consider supporting the work. You can join the Patreon for $10, $15, or $20 a month. It's a simple way to keep this project going with no ads, no fluff, just us. You can also head to theinfinitesparkofbeing.com for books, merch, one-on-one sessions with me. Just click the About button, learn a little bit more about what I do. Also, check out the YouTube channel for episodes and binaural beats that help with meditation, rest, and sleep. I love you. Thank you. Take care. See you next week.